January 17, 1945. Somewhere in the frozen hills near Malmedy, Belgium. Private First Class James Mitchell took another step forward through the snow and felt his boots slide on something slick beneath the white powder. Black ice. He had just enough time to think about grabbing for balance before his feet went out from under him completely. He fell backward, arms flailing, and hit the frozen ground hard enough to knock the wind out of his lungs. In that exact same instant, he heard a sound like an angry wasp passing through the air where his head had been 1 second earlier. Then he heard the wet impact behind him. Then screaming. Then silence. 3 men. The bullet that should have killed him had just killed 3 men standing in line behind him. Mitchell lay on his back staring at the gray winter sky, alive because he had slipped on ice. This is a story about the absolute randomness of survival in war, about the impossible role of pure chance in determining who lives and who dies, and about the guilt that comes from being the one who walks away. If you want more deep dives into the real stories of World War II, the moments that changed everything and the soldiers who lived through the impossible, subscribe to the channel. These stories deserve to be told. What happened in those 3 seconds on that frozen Belgian hillside demonstrates something historians and combat veterans have known for generations but rarely talk about. Survival in war isn't always about skill, training, or courage. Sometimes it's about stepping on a patch of ice at precisely the right moment. And sometimes that moment of accidental survival means watching 3 friends die in your place. Private James Mitchell wasn't supposed to be special. He was a rifleman with the 99th Infantry Division, one of thousands of American soldiers fighting in Belgium during the winter of 1944 and 1945. He had been in combat for 6 weeks. He was 22 years old, from a small town in Pennsylvania, and he had joined the army in 1943 because that's what everyone his age was doing. His training had been good but not exceptional. His marksmanship scores were average. He wasn't an officer, wasn't in reconnaissance, wasn't part of any elite unit. He was an infantryman doing what infantrymen did, patrolling, advancing, holding positions, and trying to stay alive in the coldest winter Europe had seen in decades. Mitchell had grown up working in his father's hardware store. He knew how to fix things, how to follow instructions, how to work hard without complaining. Those qualities made him a reliable soldier but not a memorable one. His squad leader trusted him to do his job and not cause problems. His fellow soldiers liked him well enough. He wrote letters home to his mother every week, short letters that said he was fine and didn't mention the things he was actually experiencing. He had a girlfriend back home named Sarah who sent him packages with cookies and hand-knitted socks. He carried her photograph in his jacket pocket. He was, in every measurable way, an ordinary American soldier in an army of millions. The 99th Infantry Division had arrived in Europe in November 1944, a green unit with no combat experience. They called themselves the Checkerboard Division because of their shoulder patch. They had been assigned to what was supposed to be a quiet sector of the front in the Ardennes forest, a place where new divisions could get used to combat without facing the full intensity of experienced German units. The theory was sound. The Ardennes was heavily forested, difficult terrain, and American intelligence believed the Germans wouldn't launch any major operations there. The 99th Division had been holding defensive positions in the Ardennes region when the German offensive hit on December 16th. The Battle of the Bulge had turned the entire front into chaos. Some units had been overrun completely. Others had been surrounded and cut off. The 99th had held, barely, but they had taken brutal casualties. Mitchell had been in his first real firefight on December 17th. He had seen men he knew killed by artillery. He had spent 3 days in a frozen foxhole eating cold rations and listening to German tanks moving through the forest. He had fired his rifle at shadows and muzzle flashes and shapes moving between trees. He had no idea if he had hit anyone. The experience had stripped away any romantic notions about combat he might have carried from training. By early January, the division was being used for limited offensive operations, small unit patrols meant to probe German positions and gather intelligence on enemy strength. The massive German assault had been stopped, but German forces still held strong positions throughout the region. American commanders needed to know where those positions were, how many soldiers occupied them, and whether they were preparing to withdraw or planning to defend. That meant sending patrols into contested territory, and that meant casualties. Mitchell's squad had drawn patrol duty on January 17th. Their objective was simple in theory but dangerous in practice. Move through the wooded hills northeast of Malmedy, observe German positions, avoid contact if possible, report back. The temperature that morning was 12 degrees Fahrenheit. The ground was a mix of snow, mud, and hidden patches of black ice that formed overnight when moisture froze on the compacted snow. Soldiers had been slipping and falling all week. Twisted ankles were common. Broken bones happened. One soldier in another platoon had slipped on ice, fallen down a slope, and broken his collarbone. The ice made everything slower and more dangerous. The tactical situation made things worse. The patrol was moving through partially wooded terrain with limited visibility. German snipers had been active in the area for days. 2 American soldiers had been killed by snipers in the past week, both shot through the head from concealed positions. The Germans were using the woods and the rolling hills to their advantage, setting up firing positions with clear fields of view and then disappearing after taking their shots. American commanders knew snipers were operating in the sector but couldn't pin down their locations. Counter-sniper efforts had failed. The Germans were too disciplined, too patient, and too familiar with the terrain. Mitchell's squad leader, a sergeant named Kowalski, had decided on a formation that seemed logical given the terrain. They would move in a staggered column, not bunched together but close enough to maintain visual contact in the woods. Spreading out too much meant losing communication. Bunching together meant one burst of machine gun fire could hit multiple soldiers. The staggered column was a compromise. Mitchell was third in line. Behind him were 3 other soldiers: Private Carson, Private DeMarco, and Private First Class Williams. All 3 were experienced. All 3 had survived the initial German assault in December. All 3 knew how to move quietly and watch for threats. Carson was from Georgia, a tobacco farmer's son who spoke with an accent so thick that other soldiers sometimes had trouble understanding him. He was 20 years old and had been writing a letter to his parents every single day since arriving in Europe. DeMarco was from New Jersey, quick with jokes even in the worst situations, the kind of soldier who kept morale up just by being around. Williams was older, 26, married with a daughter he had never met because she was born while he was overseas. He carried a photograph of his wife holding the baby, taken by a neighbor and mailed to him in November. What none of them could have known was that approximately 400 meters to their northeast, a German sniper had already spotted them. The sniper was almost certainly using a Karabiner 98K rifle, the standard German sniper weapon, fitted with a Zeiss ZF-42 telescopic sight. The 98K fired a 7.92 by 57 mm Mauser round, a powerful cartridge designed for long-range accuracy. In the hands of a trained marksman, it was deadly out to 600 meters. At 400 meters, against stationary or slow-moving targets, it was nearly impossible to miss. The sniper had chosen his position carefully. He was concealed in a depression on a hillside with a clear view of the trail the American patrol was using. He had been in position since before dawn, waiting in the cold, watching. German snipers were trained to endure discomfort. Hours of motionless waiting in freezing temperatures was standard procedure. The cold was an advantage because it kept you alert, kept you focused. This particular sniper had probably been operating in the Ardennes for weeks, maybe months. He knew the terrain. He knew the American patrol routes. He knew how to pick his shots and when to withdraw. When Mitchell's squad appeared, the sniper began tracking them through his scope, watching their spacing, their movement patterns, and picking his target. He chose Mitchell. Center mass would have been the safe shot, a larger target area and almost certain to cause serious injury even if not instantly fatal. But the sniper was confident. He aimed for Mitchell's head. At that range, with that rifle, It should have been certain death. The sniper had made similar shots before. He controlled his breathing, relaxed his muscles, and began the slow, steady trigger pull that separated trained marksmen from amateur shooters. Mitchell never saw the sniper. He never saw the muzzle flash. He was focused on the ground in front of him, watching his footing, trying to avoid the patches of ice he could see. The squad had been moving for almost an hour. They were tired, cold, and tense from the constant awareness that they were in hostile territory. Mitchell was thinking about nothing in particular, just putting one foot in front of the other, scanning the terrain ahead, listening for sounds that didn't belong. But black ice is called black ice because you can't see it. It looks like wet pavement or compacted snow. Mitchell's boot came down on a patch of it at 0847 hours, and physics took over. His foot slipped forward, his weight shifted backward, and he fell. The bullet left the rifle barrel at roughly 2,600 feet per second. It covered the 400 meters to Mitchell's position in less than half a second. But in that half second, Mitchell's head moved from an upright position to flat on the ground. The bullet passed through the space where his head had been. Witnesses later said they heard it crack through the air and continued on its trajectory. It struck Private Carson, who was directly behind Mitchell, in the upper chest. The 7.92 millimeters Mauser round was powerful enough to completely penetrate Carson's body. It continued through and struck Private DeMarco in the neck. DeMarco was slightly offset from Carson, which is why the bullet hit his neck instead of continuing center mass. The bullet had lost some velocity by this point but still had enough energy to exit DeMarco's body and strike Private Williams in the shoulder and upper chest area. All three men went down. Carson died instantly, the bullet having severed his aorta and caused massive internal trauma. DeMarco died within seconds, unable to breathe or call for help, drowning in his own blood. Williams lived for almost 2 minutes, conscious but unable to speak, bleeding from wounds that severed his subclavian artery. The entire sequence, from the moment the sniper fired to the moment Williams stopped breathing, took less than 3 minutes. Mitchell, lying on the ice where he had fallen, heard the shot pass over him. He heard the impacts. He heard Carson's body hit the ground and DeMarco's choked gasp and Williams trying to breathe through a collapsed lung. He rolled onto his side and saw all three men down. His training kicked in before his mind fully processed what had happened. Sniper. Single shot. Came from uphill and to the right. He looked in that direction and saw, for just an instant, the faint residue of smoke from the muzzle blast drifting in the cold air. He didn't stand up. Standing would have made him a target. He shouted the sniper's position to Sergeant Kowalski, who was further up the trail and had also dropped flat when the shot was fired. Kowalski relayed the information to the rest of the squad. 2 soldiers with Browning automatic rifles opened fire on the area where Mitchell had seen the muzzle smoke, suppressing the position. Another soldier called in the contact on the radio. Within 5 minutes, an American machine gun team had set up and was pouring fire into the hillside. The German sniper, realizing he was now under direct fire from multiple automatic weapons, withdrew from his position. He was never identified or captured, but he didn't fire again. Mitchell crawled to Carson first. He didn't need to check for a pulse. The wound made it obvious. He moved to DeMarco, also dead. Williams was still moving, still trying to breathe. Mitchell tried to stop the bleeding, pressing his hands against the wounds, but the blood kept coming. The wounds were too severe. Williams looked at Mitchell's face, seemed to recognize him, and then his eyes lost focus and he stopped moving. The entire patrol had been in the area for less than 10 minutes. 3 men were dead. The medic arrived and confirmed what Mitchell already knew. The after-action report would later note that a single enemy sniper had killed 3 American soldiers with 1 shot. Ballistics experts who examined the bodies confirmed the trajectory. 1 bullet, 3 casualties. It was rare but not impossible, especially with the 7.92 mm Mauser round fired from close to medium range. The bullet had retained enough energy after penetrating the first body to cause lethal wounds in the second and third. What the report didn't mention, because how could it, was the chance involved. If Mitchell had not slipped, he would have died instantly. If Carson had been standing slightly to the left or right, the bullet might not have hit DeMarco. If DeMarco had been positioned differently, Williams might not have been hit. An entire chain of death that resulted from one man slipping on ice at precisely the moment a trained sniper squeezed a trigger 400 meters away. The mathematics of it haunted Mitchell later. If he had taken that step 1/10 of a second earlier or later, the timing wouldn't have aligned. If the patch of ice had been 3 inches to the left or right, his foot wouldn't have hit it. If the temperature that morning had been 14 degrees instead of 12, the ice might not have formed at all. If the sniper had chosen a different target, or aimed for center mass instead of the head, or fired 1 second earlier or later, everything would have been different. The number of variables that all had to align perfectly for Mitchell to survive and for those 3 men to die was astronomical. And yet it happened. Mitchell was pulled off patrol duty for 2 days. The Army didn't have formal counseling for combat stress in 1945, but his squad leader recognized that watching 3 men die in your place does something to a soldier's mind. Mitchell barely spoke during those 2 days. He sat in the bunker his squad occupied, staring at nothing, eating mechanically when food was offered. Other soldiers tried to talk to him. He responded with single-word answers. Sergeant Kowalski told the platoon lieutenant that Mitchell needed time. The lieutenant agreed. When he returned to duty, he was quieter than before. Other soldiers in the unit knew what had happened. Some avoided talking about it around him. Others made dark jokes about lucky ice, the kind of humor combat soldiers use to process things that don't make sense. Mitchell didn't laugh at the jokes. He didn't get angry either. He just went back to doing his job. He patrolled. He dug foxholes. He cleaned his rifle. He wrote home to his mother and told her he was fine. He didn't mention Carson or DeMarco or Williams. Mitchell survived the rest of the war. He was wounded in March 1945 when shrapnel from an artillery shell hit his left leg, but the wound wasn't serious enough to send him home. He spent 2 weeks in a field hospital and then returned to his unit. He was in Germany when the war ended in May. He returned home to Pennsylvania in late 1945, married his girlfriend Sarah in 1946, and worked in a steel mill for 37 years. He never talked about the war with his family. His wife knew he had been in Belgium. His children knew he had been wounded. But he never mentioned January 17, 1945. In 1982, a researcher working on a book about the 99th Infantry Division tracked down Mitchell and asked him about his combat experiences. Mitchell was 60 years old by then. He agreed to one interview. When the researcher asked about the sniper incident, Mitchell was quiet for a long time before answering. He said he thought about it often. He said he couldn't explain why he lived and they died. He said slipping on ice shouldn't be the reason you survive a war. He said he still saw Williams' face sometimes, looking at him while dying. The interview transcript notes that Mitchell's hands were shaking when he talked about it. He told the researcher that he had visited the families of all 3 men after the war. He never told them exactly how their sons died. He just said it was quick and they didn't suffer. It was a lie, at least for Williams, but Mitchell felt he owed them something better than the truth. The randomness of combat survival is something military historians document but struggle to explain. Bullets miss by inches. Shells land 5 feet to the left instead of 5 feet to the right. Soldiers survived because they bent down to tie a boot at the exact moment shrapnel passed overhead. Survival is determined by countless small variables that no one can predict or control. Mitchell's case was simply more dramatic than most. The margin between life and death wasn't inches. It was a patch of ice the size of a dinner plate. Studies conducted after World War II attempted to analyze survival patterns in combat. Researchers looked at wound locations, unit casualties, tactical situations, and dozens of other variables trying to find patterns that could reduce deaths. What they found was that while training and tactics mattered, pure chance played an enormous role that no amount of preparation could eliminate. A soldier could do everything right and still die. Another soldier could make mistakes and survive. The data showed it again and again. German sniper doctrine during World War II emphasized patience and precision. Snipers were trained to take high-percentage shots against valuable targets. A clean headshot on an American soldier moving through open terrain at 400 meters was exactly the kind of shot German snipers were trained to take. The sniper who fired at Mitchell did everything correctly. He chose a good position, waited for his target, aimed carefully, and fired when he had a clear shot. By all measures of training and skill, Mitchell should have died. But war doesn't respect training or skill. It respects physics, probability, and timing. The German sniper couldn't have known about the black ice. Mitchell couldn't have known he was being targeted. The whole event came down to timing measured in fractions of a second. If Mitchell's foot had come down on solid ground, he takes another step and the bullet hits him. If it comes down on ice but he doesn't fall, same result. The fall had to happen at the precise moment the bullet was traveling through the space his head occupied. Anything else, he dies. So when people talk about luck in war, this is what they mean. Not good fortune or divine protection, but the intersection of countless random variables that produce an outcome no one could predict. Mitchell slipped on ice and lived. 3 men behind him died. There's no lesson in that. No morals. No deeper meaning. Just the cold mathematics of trajectory and timing and the arbitrary nature of survival. Mitchell died in 1998 at the age of 75. His obituary in the local newspaper mentioned his service in World War II and his Bronze Star, which he received for calling in the sniper position that day in Belgium. It didn't mention the 3 men who died. At his funeral, his daughter found a small wooden box in his belongings. Inside were 3 photographs: Carson, DeMarco, and Williams. On the back of each photograph, Mitchell had written their names, their hometowns, and the date. January 17, 1945. He had carried those photographs for 53 years and never showed them to anyone. Thanks for watching this deep dive into one of World War II's most haunting stories. If you want more real stories about the soldiers who fought and the impossible choices of war forces on ordinary people, subscribe to the channel. These stories deserve to be told.